dinner tonight.
Oh, okay.
But no, I'm gonna eat cookies.
Well, they're right back there.
Hey, Sarah.
I'll tell you about her.
Okay.
Right there.
She, the big fun thing was, she was going to go to this company that had telephone operations. I'll tell you.
City of Burlingwood City Council meeting for Wednesday, May 17th, 2023 will come to order at 7:03 p.m. and we will call the roll, starting with Councilwoman Brown.
Brooke Brown.
Alec Robinson.
Kevin Glasheen.
Phil McDuffie.
Sarah Hudson.
Gavin Massengill. And a quorum present, we will move on to first agenda item for public comment. Are there any folks wishing to make public comment on items not on the agenda? Please identify yourself.
Mayor, council members, everybody. Shanti Jayakumar, 3309 Park Hills Drive. This is not relating to a specific agenda item, but it's to do with City Hall. So I thought I could say it at the beginning. So as you all know, and many of you know, this City Hall was built in 1975. And for $50,000 with no debt, and monies gathered from Women's Club, from all kinds of volunteer organizations. And in here, I have some copies of this for you guys. I think I made enough this time. The City Hall and Fire Station, as it was called, won an award, design award. It was design awarded by the Texas Institute of Building Design. The approximate 3,000 square foot building was completed about 18 months, 18 months ago. This was the newspaper article, at a cost of approximately $50,000, designed by Bill Coleman and Earl Nesbitt. I don't even know if they're around, Design Associates, Inc. And it was built by Cliff Herling. Design will be considered for awards at the upcoming national gathering at the Institute of Building Design to be held in Sacramento, California. I have no idea what happened, whether they got anything. And there's a newspaper article about when City Hall was started. And I threw in some pictures for y'all when they, turned the groundbreaking. They had a benediction and they turned the soil with shovels, and that was the start of City Hall. And then another picture here is from the ribbon cutting when they finished City Hall. Okay, so I just made, I think I have, I'm sure y'all can make a few more, but let's see. Let me see if I can let it pass. What triggered this comment here today was somebody approached me from the building committee that y'all have set up and wanted me to give them whatever history that I might have. And I do have a lot more than this. I have design drawings by different architects, 2004, 2011, and then for the redo of City Hall. All of that will come in due course. But something that I wanted y'all to be aware of is this painting right here by Earl, what is his name? Oh, God, I have to look at it here. He was a very famous artist, and he came and spoke. There were tickets sold, again, for the building fund, and he came and spoke. And then the person that won the drawing for the tickets was a bank, and they donated it back to the city. And so that $2,000 was again seed money towards the $50,000. So, and then this Women's Club donated whatever they had made in a couple of years, saved $1,600. That went into the building fund. And there's a whole bunch of other people that contributed to the $50,000, so it could be debt-free and was built as is. We have done some redos for the bathrooms were changed, but other than that, this is a almost 50-year-old building. And so I'm so excited that we are going to have a new city hall. And I hope that just like we did with this building, we'll involve all the citizens of this community in whatever way possible. Maybe not, you don't need the money because you have, got the, what do you call it? The bond money, but whatever way the citizens can help towards contributing to this building in whatever way. Ideas, time, anything. I hope y'all will call upon the citizens to do that. So that's what I wanted to tell y'all. And good luck for all y'all's bond issues and going with the flow on that, and also for the fire department. And this was also designed to be a hall and fire station, so we've come full circle, but we'll have a real up-to-date fire station, not just the truck that we bought for $5,000, which was called Big Red, and they use that with the volunteer fire department. That story another time. Okay.
Oh, thank you, Shanti. With that, do we have any other, anyone else wishing to testify? Okay, then we will move on to agenda item number 2, presentation and discussion regarding a potential bond issuance timeline for General Obligation Bond Series 2023. I think we have James Gilly here from USCA, and go ahead and go for that. And then while he's coming up, while James is coming up, I wanted to also give some good news to the council that is related to this agenda item. We had, was it last week? We had the S&P ratings call. So we had an S&P ratings call that I was on. We had our professional consultants on that, as well as our local team. We felt like it went really well. Had about an hour-long conversation with S&P. And then we just got notified yesterday or the day before, I think, that we are getting upgraded to AA+ for our bond rating. So we're very pleased with that. You can tell us more about it, but I think it seemed to be a testament to what we were doing here in Rolling Wood. And so talk to us about what that could mean.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for the privilege of being here. For the record, I'm James Gilly with U.S. Capital Advisors. As the mayor stated, kind of coincidentally, Standard & Poor's maintains a rating on some of your outstanding debt, and periodically they'll conduct a surveillance rating so that they can maintain and update the rating for the benefit of the public market. And as part of this rating, as the mayor said, the city was upgraded from a AA to a AA+. And cited in the report were a number of factors. First of all, the city has a very strong economy, but y'all have also been very conservative in your budgeting practices. You've built up your cash reserves. You've had consistent positive results in your general and in your total governmental funds. So I'd like to applaud you on that. It's an excellent achievement, and it takes a lot of discipline to get there. I don't want to get into the weeds too much, but they did suggest that another rating upgrade could be in the future if the city continue to demonstrate positive operating results and additional increased reserves. But with that, I'll get into the agenda item. I'm just going to give a kind of a broad overview of the process of issuing the bonds. I believe you may have in your agenda packet a timetable. It's just a draft timetable, subject to change, of course. But the first item, of course, is tonight council meeting to discuss this and to decide on a path forward. If council decides to proceed as laid out in the timetable, the first step would be for the team to prepare some offering documents with collaboration from folks at ORIC, and of course we need some input from y'all's team. We prepare a preliminary official statement, a POS, and a notice of sale. The POS is essentially a prospectus for potential investors. The notice of sale specifies the terms of the bid by which any investors must follow. So that we would prepare those drafts. We would have a few rounds of comments over a period of 2 to 4 weeks. We would request a bond rating on the issuance of bonds. And given the recent surveillance, I think that there wouldn't be much to it. They may ask for a little bit of update on the proposed bond issuance. So sometime in, the timetable suggests a bond sale, a competitive bond sale on the morning of Wednesday, July 19th, which is a regular council meeting date. So we plan on offering these via competitive bond sale. We take, auction type sale in the morning, assuming a successful bid. We would then compile the final numbers and then bring that to the council meeting later that evening, and council would consider approval of the bond ordinance authorizing the issuance of the general obligation bonds. And assuming all that goes as planned, the transaction would close about 30 days later, and the city would have funds in hand ready to start spending. But that's just a broad overview of the timetable. At no point are you, until you actually act on the bond ordinance the day of the sale, you're not obligated you're not obligated to proceed. You may have be out of pocket for a rating fee for Standard & Poor's, but.
So are you pausing for questions?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Basheen, go for it.
I just have a few quick questions. So have we decided how much this issuance is going to be? Is it going to be for the full amount of what the voters approve for?
I think, and that's a good, it's an issue, actually it's an issue that I think also came up in our S&P call. I would anticipate probably, working with our engineering firm, in my mind, it would make more sense to sort of stage those at the appropriate time, so that we're not doing one lump sum bonded indebtedness issuance. But I think it's open for discussion, and in my mind, it's whatever the bond council sort of recommends in terms of what gets us the best rate, what gets us the best, bang for our buck on the marketplace.
Well, I guess rates are unpredictable, so if we do
They are.
stagger the issuance, we reduce the risk by basically reverse laddering the bonds, I guess, kind of laddering our rates over maybe more than one issuance. But there's also some extra costs with doing more than one issuance, isn't there?
Yes, there are some redundant costs, such as the bond rating for the rating agencies.
What's a ballpark number for a redundant cost? Like for a second TAD to split it into two issuances?
Well, the rating fee would probably be one of the biggest, at least one of the major factors. That depending on the size, it could be anywhere from $15,000
Okay.
and upwards.
Another question, one thing I mentioned, I think, Mr. Mayor, you might have been at the legislature when this came up before, but, I know there's a bill and it's still alive, according to the news last week, to fund a lot of water infrastructure in Texas with some of the surplus. And I heard one of our senators talking about it on the news yesterday. So
It passed the House yesterday.
yeah, so with that, I'm kind of hopeful about the idea of applying for another grant from the Water Development Board before we spend bond money on water projects.
I was thinking the same thing, and this is very unofficial and not based in fact quite yet, but I have had some initial conversations with the Water Development Board, with leadership there. I wouldn't get our hopes up too much. I'm not sure that our demographics lend themselves to.
We don't really have the need base that we have.
Yes.
They don't feel sorry for us?
It was said in
We don't have any sales
term
tax
similar
or
to that,
anything.
but yeah. Not to say that it's not a possibility, and I do
Right.
think we still need to look into it. I just wouldn't, I don't think that we should assume that that's gonna happen. so.
Okay. But we shouldn't necessarily assume it's not gonna happen
Shouldn't,
either.
no, certainly not, and we, and they're not done with all of their work in the
Because as I
legislature, so-
understand the water timeline, that we basically are gonna be in design development or design phase through about October when we could let contracts. And so that's not real far away.
Yeah, and it'll take them a while to stand that process up at the Water Development Board, make sure,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the budget won't even take effect until September. So I think, again, in my mind, that would lend itself probably to a tiered approach where
Mm-hmm.
things that are somewhat shovel-ready or ready to go out for bid, we would probably move forward with at least some component of that. And then by that point, we would have more clarity on if there is additional revenue to be had or applications to be made.
And as far as our city hall building, what kind of schedule do we think we're on coming up with a design and cost estimates on a project?
I think they're making progress on that. I'll ask Ashley to comment.
They've recently been meeting with the fire department. I'm not too sure on kind of other action steps they've been taking in the community. This is the community group that has been formed to kind of, vet different ideas and talk about the design. I would anticipate getting them moving forward with the fire department, probably to be one of the first steps to make sure that, we're on board with whatever kind of possible shared use space. I know they'll be looking for a decision from us pretty soon, but for the fire department's relocation. As far as overall timeline, I'm not sure I have an idea of that.
They haven't even hired an architect yet, right? So we're like 6 months, we've got to be a year out from being
Yeah,
able
I
to
think
build
that one
something.
is definitely further out.
Okay. Yeah.
But I think the water
Water.
projects, yeah, the water line projects are much closer.
And
yeah.
water was what, 5 million or so?
5.3.
Yeah.
And how much is the city hall project?
I think 2.5, and then an extra 1 million possibly from the ESD 9.
And the water project will take a year to finish. It's really mostly one phase, so we should probably do the bonds for the water now in July.
I think actually, and I want to hear from our engineers, I don't think they're,
There's more than one phase.
yeah, I think there's probably a few phases to that.
So we could stagger
Yeah.
part of that water issue
Yeah.
too. Combine it, maybe split the whole thing in two.
Yeah.
Do like
My
4
thought,
and
again,
4.
it's council's discretion, but my thought would be to try to get our feet wet with the easiest, something that we think is simplest to do, easiest to do, quickest to do. Like, let's kind of practice on that one. See how we need to manage that process, and then
You're talking about the water one?
the water
being
one. Yeah,
easier?
yeah.
So you're thinking like,
I'm sorry.
You know,
no,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
I'd understood that we would look at doing the cul-de-sacs first because they're smaller and they're already designed.
In my mind, that is the easiest one to do. Yeah,
That's what I
yeah.
understood.
And affect the few.
And they need fire safety.
Affect the fewest, or at least the smallest geographic area. I mean, several geographic areas, but
Yes.
it's kind of contained. And I mean, in my mind, that would be what I would quantify as low-hanging fruit.
So are we thinking we might do, if we have 8 million in bonds approved roughly, that we would do like 4 million now and then another 4 million this fall, like maybe in November?
I think in my mind, we would look at the cul-de-sac project. I need to refresh on the cost estimate for that, or at least the ballpark estimate. Are there some other things that layer in those areas that would make sense to do those at the same time? So, I don't know, 2 million. I don't want to get out on a limb. I don't know
Sure.
how much it would be,
But just some number.
some reasonable, substantive amount, but not too much.
And just, y'all will decide that like administratively and recommend something before July 19th?
Well, yeah, we'll come to you guys with a recommendation.
Okay. All right, thank you. Those were all my questions. Appreciate it.
And just for the record, let's put that on probably on the, well, we'll get with you, but let's
have a
between now and the next council meeting, let's visit with the engineers and say, kind of based on their presentation to council, I don't want to stray from what council's already sort of heard. But let's go ahead and try to tee something up to come back for a discussion.
Yeah.
Does that work? Yes, sir.
The only comment I would have is like, I'm fine with the schedule if that's what everyone here wants. I'm just sort of wondering if we're not gonna be building anything until the end of the year, why do we need the money in July? It seems like it's about a 3-month timeline from like when we decide to go to when we have the money in the bank. It's just a thought, like if we're not gonna be spending it in July, do we need to have it in the bank in July?
Do we
No,
need
that's-
to
Well, we-
start paying interest?
I was
on
gonna
it?
say, we also have to pay the people that are designing the project,
Yeah.
so there are some expenses, even
Yeah.
if we haven't started
we-
construction.
True.
Well, and I understand that we actually have enough funds where we could pay for the design phase of the water project through October without a bond issuance.
And then
get paid back. We just
Yes.
have to pass a resolution or an ordinance.
you actually already,
authorizing-
you already
Or we
passed
already
that.
passed that,
So, yes,
right.
yeah.
So, yeah, we can handle the cash flow until October.
And James, can you speak to the timeline on making this decision now and being able to roll that into our tax rate, which we need to have a pretty good idea on by July, August?
Yes, that's an excellent point. And just a quick point of clarification, if the bonds were sold in July, the transaction, as I said, would close about 30 days later, and the interest would not begin accruing until the date of closing. And so, from, say, mid-August, that's kind of when you start accruing interest. But I think the purpose of this timeline was to illustrate being able to get the debt service for next year into the tax rate, y'all's budget and tax rate process later this fall. And I believe that the posting requirements, the taxation, the truth in taxation, y'all need to post your tax rate sometime around, is it August? Or you need to begin hearings?
Late July, early August. I think August 7th is our deadline to deliver those.
Okay. And so if you set your tax rate, in the fall, and then you turned around and issued bonds, say in November, you wouldn't be able to levy and collect a tax on that to pay next year's debt service until the following year. So you'd have at least a couple interest payments and possibly a principal payment that you have to make out of out of fund balances or something.
Good point.
And can we use that principal to pay the interest payments if we don't have the tax revenue? Or could it only be used on the projects?
Are you asking if you can use the
Yeah, I mean,
proceeds from the bond sale to make?
Yeah, if you say that
Debt
we may
service.
not have enough tax revenue to make the debt service payments, my question is, can we use some of that money that's gonna be sitting in our bank of the 2 or 4 or whatever many millions of bond issuance that sits in our bank, I assume? And I'm just asking if there's any restriction on using that for debt service.
I have to defer to the legal expert. Can you
Yeah,
use?
it's not that important of a question, but if you happen to know off the top of your head, I was just curious.
But I think it's worth the record, because you're saying you would do that if they don't issue bonds before September 30th, right?
Yeah.
But you're saying, can you pay it with bond funds,
Pay the debt service.
but you wouldn't, without issuing the bonds?
No, issuing the bonds but not raising our tax rate until next year. Like if we have a 6-month delay in raising our tax rate from the bond issuance, I don't know if we would have enough cash flow to service the debt without getting into principal, but I'm just curious whether we are allowed to get into that bond principal to the loan proceeds, the bond proceeds.
So taking the proceeds from the bond sale and using a portion of it to pay the debt service?
Yeah, I'm just curious if that's allowed or no.
Sure, I
I would
believe
think-
that's allowable.
Okay. All right, I was just curious.
But then, of course, you're reducing the amount of your project.
Well, of course, yeah, right. It's borrowing money to pay debts, it's
Borrow money to
always a
pay
bad
back.
idea. It's a spiral.
Well, from a timing standpoint, if we don't get this on the next budget, that money would be collected in January of next year. if we don't get it on this budget, then we don't collect any money until January of 2025.
Oh, wow.
So it's not that we just, are a couple of months behind. It's like,
Yeah.
25, why is it 2 years delay?
This,
well, because if we
January
put it
21st
on this
coming up.
the next budget, it would be on the tax bills.
2023, 23, 24,
That we
and
would
then
get
24,
For
25.
2020, we'd pay 2024, and if it's not on that one, then we don't get it on the bills until,
I see.
The timetable would suggest
2025.
the bonds are sold in July, you know your final debt service,
Got it.
you go into your budget process, levy your tax to pay the debt service.
Got it.
January, you start collecting, your first payment comes due February of '24. So,
Got it. Thank y'all.
Yeah. So it will be worth us making some of these decisions in the relatively near future. There may be a special meeting or two that is required for us to make sure we've got all of our i's dotted and t's crossed. But come January or June, we can just meet all the time as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, yeah.
Till the special session comes. Okay, anything we have not asked or discussed that we should for council's consideration in your mind?
No, I don't think so.
What, putting you on the spot, if you were here and not there, what would you recommend that we
If
do?
I were there, and you'd be here, and, well.
I'd know a lot more than.
In terms of, the question of, the interest rates going up or down, there's no crystal ball, no idea where rates will be in a year. We just advise our clients, issue the debt as close to when you need to start spending the funds as possible. And, based on the timing of the tax cycle, it sounds like this might be a good time. Costs will likely still go up. They've been going up for, construction costs have been going up, as I understand, for a couple of years now. So, it's.
What's the typical refunding period for a bond like this?
The market generally will accept a nine-year call feature,
Okay.
prepayment protection. We could ask for a shorter call feature, but shorter than 9 years, you might start to see a little bit of impact on the interest rate.
Initial rate. Okay.
Okay, great. Appreciate you. Thank you again for the help with the S&P call prep. I think it went really well.
My pleasure, and again, congratulations.
And on that, I know it's hard to determine, but those could result in significant savings on the rate that we'll end up accessing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, an underwriter and investors are going to rely pretty heavily on the bond rating of the issuer, and so that's definitely a step in the right direction. I think it'll certainly help.
And I would just compliment council again, this council and previous councils as well. It certainly was discussed and talked about, and the fact that we were making a conscious effort and acknowledged that a percentage, which is usually what S&P looks at in terms of your reserve funds, that we acknowledge that for us, with such a small budget, a percentage doesn't get you the hard dollar amount that you really need. So we may be at a percentage that's equivalent or in excess to a Fort Worth or a Dallas or a Houston or something like that, but because the dollar amount is so low, that typically has not been looked as favorably on by S&P. But this council and previous councils have acknowledged that and have really tried to drive that hard dollar reserve to greater levels where we're, I know 5 years ago, I think we had a 2-month reserve, then we moved it to 3-month, then 4-month, and we're continuing to move that reserve up and up and up to a higher hard dollar amount. And that was looked favorably by S&P, and I think they appreciated that we're looking at it like that, and I think that was a big part of it too. So, okay, anything else? Any other questions?
One
Yes,
last
Al.
comment. Will we be able to, it looks like in like a couple weeks, or at least by the end of the month, comments are due on the first draft bond. So it sounds like we'll have some of the bond documents. Can we take a look at them? Can you share them?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's make sure that we get that to everyone in a timely manner.
So it's just the draft prospectus. Is there anything else?
There's a notice of sale. As I said, it just lays out the terms of the bid
I see.
and the restrictions on investors.
And you're calling the prospectus a POS?
A preliminary official statement. Once the bond sale is final, it'll turn into an official statement.
Okay, but that's just the formal name of the prospectus?
Yes, sir. So
It's a bold acronym.
Yeah, I was wondering.
Just saying.
It's the only one that's interesting.
Not an editorial on the issuance.
You do you. Okay. Great. Any other questions? Great. Moving on to agenda item number 3, public hearing, discussion and possible action regarding the addition of a building height survey requirement to the city's code of ordinances. I believe this is Councilwoman Brown's agenda item. We'll recognize Councilwoman Brown, and I know Ms. Wayman has done a great job in working with our contract professionals to help work through a process that I think is workable. So Ms. Brown, we'll recognize you, and then I'll ask Ms. Wayman to answer any questions or walk us through anything.
Well, I think, I was expecting Ms. Wayman would go first. and
That's just
explain
great. We'll
the
just do
survey,
that then.
and I
That's,
just had 2 nits to add at the end.
Okay, great.
I can go first.
Ashley?
All right, so we have worked with ATS. They are able to advise us on local amendments to the building code. We've talked to them about how to be sure that this requirement for a building height survey be placed in our code. They have recommended the locations that you'll see in the draft ordinance in the packet to be added both to the International Building Code and the International Residential Code. After working with them as well as legal and planning, we've determined that at framing is generally a place where cities would require those kind of inspections. And so we have made those additions here. This is posted for a public hearing because when you are adding something to your local building codes, when you're making a local amendment, it does require that there's a public hearing held. And so that's why this is pulled up earlier on the agenda. And then I believe Councilmember Brown has submitted a second draft that is also in the packet. And if you'd like to discuss that, we can discuss that here.
Yes. If you look at the second draft of the ordinance, what I proposed, in the little memo I did, what I proposed was, as originally proposed by ATS, it would be a survey done of the building height at setting the grade level at the time the initial building permit application is filed. And what I added was to use the terms that are in the proposed height ordinance zoning provisions of the code to say the native original ground surface, so we know what's going to be measured. And then the second thing I did was to add a second survey upon application for an occupancy permit so that we will be able to get a survey of the as-built height. We've seen that issue come up several times this year, and it's also one of the considerations that the Planning and Zoning Commission has talked about, that it would be a help to enforcement of our code that builders provide a survey of the building height as built. So that is what I would propose on this amendment.
Okay.
I have a question. Is this a good
Yes,
time?
I'd like to come back to make sure that I'm clear on that, but yes, sir, Mr. Glasheen.
Go ahead, it's fine.
No, that's okay. Let's get it all out.
Have we got a definition of original native ground surface? I know it's a very descriptive term and it seems self-evident, but it's complicated because we have houses like the one we looked at on Hubbard Circle where it's recently demolished, and it's got a lot of existing grades from the previous house. There's clearly a lot of cut and a lot of fill already, and so if we're going to try to figure out what 1960 original native ground surface was, I don't think there's any way to do that.
The, in the zoning code, the language would be that the original native ground surface shall be determined as the existing grade on the lot prior to development of the residential building as may be shown on the approved building plans or survey of the property. And so when you have a complicated situation, that would be something that would be done during the permit process.
So we consider it to be the grade as it existed before the existing house was demolished? Or if they come in, they've already demolished that house and they're gonna have a permit for a new house, what if they changed the grade even during demolition, you know, when they
Well,
scrape the lot? I mean, what is I don't know
So
how you would administer that.
Currently, what generally happens is and we've also had a bit of a change in our process when it comes to demo permits. Demo permits are no longer the ground and below, they're only everything above the ground. So we have a demo permit, we have a site disturbance, which is when they're able to then come in. That has a lot more to do with drainage, that's when they're actually regrading. In the case of when they all happen at once, so they come in and they say, we want to, scrape, build a new house, they would need all three of those, and so we require that survey up front. The only time I can see that being an issue is if they do those very far apart. So if they just demolish and do a site disturbance and regrade the property and don't build a house at that time, I suppose our policy could be to keep that survey on file, the original, that shows the original native grade. But I don't know how far apart those could be before we have a relevant survey in our files.
But
And that term is used in the current height ordinance. So
It
it's
is.
not a new thing.
But that's one of the problems with our current height ordinance is that it's inscrutable and unenforceable because nobody knows what
Not
grade
in this
is.
respect.
What's that?
Not in this respect.
Sure, I understand, and there are other problems with the current definitions of grade, which this is better than what we have, but I still want to make sure it's something that we know. And and I'm more concerned with how it's going to get administered than anything else, because if city staff can't understand it and explain how they're going to apply it, then I think we're creating a problem. And so that's really what I want to hear from staff. And it seems to me that if you require a demolition permit, do we require a survey of existing grades when they do the demolition permit?
I think that would have to be the process going forward. Currently, generally, yes, because they happen all at once. They usually come in and say, I want to do all three, a demo, site disturbance, and then new build. But if they don't, I think that needs to be part of our process, that we require that survey before.
Demolition.
Right,
Because
exactly.
if I bought a lot, tore down a house, regraded it, sold it to somebody else who's going to build a house, nobody knows what the original native grade was at that point, right?
Right.
That's the point. We're starting a process
Mhm.
that we don't have today, because we are going to if we pass this ordinance, we would begin to have that information up front.
Can we start requiring a survey for demolition permits now? Or or do we need an ordinance to do that too, in addition to this ordinance?
Go ahead, Nikki. I'll let you.
Yeah, so Nikki Stotzenberger, Development Services. We do require a survey, but it doesn't have the actual elevations on it. It's got topography on it, but it's not gonna have that
Oh.
original survey of the exact.
And that's a great point. To find those points, to find those two, the highest and lowest, it's tied to where the foundation is going to be. So if it's just a demo permit only and we don't know what the new home is gonna look like, there's nowhere for them to point to make those 2 points, determine if they're further than 10 feet apart, and move forward with that. So actually, I guess,
But if-
we could require a survey, but it wouldn't provide that information.
Well,
It would.
sounds like what we need to do is prevent people from doing any changes to the topography until they have a building permit.
That would work too.
Right. So I guess they would just leave, if they weren't going to, they could demo slab up and leave the slab and not do any other,
They're gonna have to.
They have to
They
get
could,
this.
they could take the slab up, but then they just don't do any other
Mm-hmm.
grading.
I think that would maybe end up possibly in, still messing with the site.
What if they surveyed, surveyed the elevations of the perimeter of the existing structure and did like 5-foot topo elevations across the lot before the demo? And then you'd have the data you need to really figure it out. And then you could overlay the new
You could
plans over
overlay it.
that topo.
Yeah, you could do an overlay. You probably just wouldn't have those exact surveyed points, but you'd
Yeah,
have a
you're
general
close.
idea with the topo lines.
With 5-foot topo lines, you'd have a pretty good idea.
Right.
Allows them
It's
to get
just-
a building, get it drawn up without putting themselves at risk.
What's that?
That allows them to, I mean, hopefully it's, unless they're really pushing the limits, that allows
Oh.
them to
Yeah. It's-
draw the plans up
Yeah.
without
It's
putting themselves at
useful
risk.
information for them
Yeah.
planning the new building, yeah.
Right.
I think so. So it's not like it's a total waste to the homeowner
No, it'd be
who's
something-
demoing a house.
Yeah.
Sure.
Do we need an ordinance to require that data or that
Uh,
kind of survey for a demo permit?
State that again, please, Kevin, when you would have that topo done?
Before demolition?
Do
So-
a 5-foot topo before demolition.
Of everything outside the building envelope and then survey the building envelope elevations
Of the existing
of
building.
the existing
that's-
building prior to demolition. That
Right.
way, you would have some grades that you could measure from the new building. When they come in a year later and want to build a new building and they say what existing grade is, you know what it was before demolition, because it's gonna change during demolition.
Yeah.
I like it.
Okay. I wanted to sort of get this agenda item laid out, but I also need to take us to public hearing, and then we'll come back. We'll close the public hearing and then come back for further discussion. So with that, I will open the public hearing at 7:44 on agenda item number 13, which is the public hearing, discussion, and possible action regarding the addition of a building height survey requirement to the city's code of ordinances. And we'll be happy to recognize anyone here wishing to testify in public comment. Everyone's rushing up on this one, going once,
Signed up.
going twice. Okay, with that, we will close the public hearing also at 7:44 PM. And now it's back to you, council.
We're moving on to cookies.
A snack break for Mr. Yashim.
Better pass these around now. Brought enough for everyone.
I'm just confused again. Can you guys, someone just summarize what, we have two of these ordinances in front of us. What's the difference between the two?
This ordinance that's, on which we're having the public hearing would add a requirement, regardless of what we would set height at. It would add a requirement to do surveys before construction and as built.
That's the draft
And
one.
with Kevin's idea, he would have one before, he would add before demolition of the property.
So Alec, to Ms. Robinson.
Surveys are we, like,
So Ms.
adding-
Robinson, to answer your question,
redundant.
so the draft one is the draft that,
Recording in progress.
Sorry, I'll make a quick announcement. We just realized we're having some firewall issues, so we're not streaming to YouTube right now. We are recording, and we're just now recording Zoom just to make sure we have some extra backups, but our streaming is not working at the moment, so just,
Might need Google Fiber.
we might.
okay, so draft number one is the draft that staff worked with ATS, our contractor that does our, a lot of our inspections and that sort of thing. And so they sort of worked through that. And then draft two, and I'm not sure, does everyone have the same information at the top? And the draft two is that same draft in, with the addition of, I think, the comments that Councilwoman Brown, and I'll leave it to her to say whether they're reflected correctly or not, but I believe that's the difference between the two.
Yes. I was thinking the other ordinance.
And if we did a pre-demolition survey, we wouldn't need a pre-construction survey too, unless there hadn't been a pre-demolition survey, I would think.
Well, the demo survey would not establish the datum reference. in the construction survey would establish the datum reference. So that's what I'm thinking we would need at the time construction is initiated.
That's probably right.
You need both.
This is all probably something we would need to work through with our, building official and with our zoning reviewers and just to make sure that we're, capturing all this and putting this into our process.
And a question for staff. Did ATS have a chance to look at the second draft and comment?
They did. They quickly looked at it. They are mainly focused on placement of the actual language, and so it was in the same place as the other. So they felt it was policy at that point, policy decision
Okay.
on what to put there.
How it works.
They agree that
Sure that it
the way the
doesn't
policy
go
drafted
against
works
the
the way
state.
is appropriate. Not appropriate in as it's appropriate policy, but will that work as the person who does it?
That's
Because that's what we need to rely on them for.
right.
What's ATS?
They do our building code inspections, and so
Oh,
we
it's a-
generally treat them like a building official.
They're the engineering firm?
Subject matter experts.
They
One
are
of them.
all sorts of, they do engineering, they have a surveying arm, but yeah, they're not our city engineer, but they do our building code.
Right,
reviews.
contract
They would-
engineering
yeah,
services
if-
for,
Right.
If the council's decision is
Inspection
to
services.
have this be in something that
Right.
we do, they would be the ones that most likely do it, if that's your policy decision.
so we should hear from them about it, right?
That'd be
She
a
said
great
they-
idea.
That's your,
They looked at it.
There will still be an additional step too after this to get, somebody on board to be do these on a contract basis for the city. This would be the only inspection or the survey currently, the inspections we do run, but the only survey that we would run through us. And so that's a little bit different than other surveys and other parts of the process. And so we do need to establish some kind of a contract with them for these surveying services. And so, we could probably have them come speak to both of those parts, try to be a little more ready to have this whole process, kind of more shored up by the next meeting.
And I know we've heard this before, but I mean, don't we have some kind of base LiDAR topography data, elevation data for these lots, or is it too rough to be of any use?
I don't know how,
and we have some of that data for some of the drainage, but I'm not sure that it's ever really been
Not that-
applied to
We
the
don't have it yet.
building
We
component.
don't?
The-
No, but this is what we would be applying.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Mayor, in that regard, I think the CRCRC is looking at what underlying reference standard to use for our elevations. And if we can, and that's do you use so-and-so's mean high sea level, or do you use another person's or another entity's mean high sea level to establish elevation? And they're gonna be smarter about that than we are, I believe. But I think the point of this amendment at this point in time is so that we can start requiring the survey as we apply the code today, both initially at initiation of construction, when the datum reference is set, and then also an as-built survey, so that we can enforce our existing height ordinance. And this would be based on what we have in the code currently, which is problematic. We're trusting people today. So this is one step that I think has good general support across the spectrum of those people who've looked at it. And I don't have a problem with adding, recommending. I think maybe what I would recommend is a motion tonight asking that our staff work with ATS to develop language that would have a survey requirement for both the demolition, the way you've described it, Councilmember Lasheen, at the initial construction that establishes the datum reference, and then as built.
So
And all of these would be, there's another provision where, or another item we're taking up tonight where these would be these surveys would be charged to the builder. So,
I was gonna say, I like the idea of verifying that the finished height meets our requirements. I'm not sure that waiting until they're getting their CO is an appropriate time to do it, because at that
is there a
point,
better time, if there's a better time,
yeah, well, they can still fix it.
That,
Well, that's
Yeah,
why
that's
they're
the
requiring it
framing.
at the, so they're doing it at the framing.
that was
and
my
then
only
again,
question. That was my
No,
question.
you're checking the ground elevation up front.
But you're checking the height. So, just
But
for
that-
clarity's sake, if I can simplify this, the code that you're adding, and correct me if I'm wrong, Councilman Brown, the code that you're proposing to add would only kick in if they're getting within 5 feet of, if their plans say they're getting within 5 feet of that 35-foot maximum height. If that's the case, then what we're proposing is that they check the height at the time when they're done with their framing to make sure they haven't exceeded it then, and then again,
That's not what's in here.
is it
There's
not?
There's nothing about at the time of framing.
So draft one, the original proposal was just adding it at the time of framing. So that was, the original draft in the packet, draft one, only has prior to passing the framing inspection, that was the proposal. Draft two, so, and also to clarify, that beginning survey is already a requirement. Builders already submit that. Now, you know, how we go about collecting that and if we are changing that process, that's a separate thing. But this would, at the draft two, would require it at framing and at, prior to getting the occupancy permit. So that would be two, staff,
separate
you know,
checks.
city-led surveys, one at framing, one at, CO, is how draft two currently reads. The first draft is only during,
so,
Framing.
Councilmember, oh, I'm sorry,
that's it.
May,
Councilman, yeah.
I would like to recommend or recognize Councilmember Hudson on this question. The way it's drafted in draft two, there would be one prior to passing the framing inspection, and then upon application for an occupancy permit, the second one, that would do the as-built.
Right.
Is there a better option there, in your opinion?
I just, prior to getting the CO, I don't know what our recourse would be if they don't pass.
Okay, where would you do it short of that then? Or
Well, I think
where-
the
where would-
framing is where you need to check, I mean, it's
Yeah.
like the one we had on Park
Yeah.
Hills. It's like, they were still building and it says, this is too high, and they were able to drop the roof down to get within the limits. But if you wait until they're ready to move in and go, oh,
Yeah.
look, it's 3 inches too
If,
tall,
yeah, my thought would
you're
be.
not fixing that.
Yeah, my thought would be that if the policy decision of the council is to require this, probably not at framing, but before they pass their framing inspection, which means all of the framing's done, the roof deck is done, like all of that's done. And if the policy decision is to have, that seems like the appropriate time to do it. And it still would probably be costly to fix if they're off, but at least it's doable.
That means you make sure you got it right.
Correct.
And I don't see how the height's gonna change much after framing. I don't see how that
I
how
think
it
it's
helps to
probably
get that.
redundant, yeah, I think,
Seems redundant.
yeah, but
And
again,
it-
that's y'all's call.
and
I
it
don't
does
think
cost
so, because
money.
I think it depends on the type of roofing and things that they do, given the fact that there are a lot of variables that are still there, whether they're doing ceramic roofing, whether they're putting in solar panels on top of that, and all those other things. And once again, this is only occurring when they're pushing up at the limits. If they give themselves buffer by not going to the absolute limit, then it's not as much of an issue.
And I have another question, that is that, and thanks for explaining that view. What's that noise?
I have no idea.
I have another question, and we talk about a survey. Is there a cheap, cost-effective way of measuring height without doing a formal survey?
That is what we are in discussions with ATS about currently. So they are licensed surveyors, but there are ways to use survey equipment to get that information without doing a full-blown survey. And some other factors come into it, where the monuments are located. If they're located very far away, it can become a very costly endeavor. And so we have been working with them on, you know, how can we get an accurate result that doesn't take 3 weeks to schedule, 2 weeks for y'all to turn around a document that's a survey.
Right.
And so that's just
And
still an
costs
ongoing.
$2,500. Shoot it with a laser and call it.
That's
good.
always been my concern, and we're happy to administer this to the best of our ability, and we'll do so. And my concern has always been that the city would be the one holding the project up, and I know that I'm sure I would get calls, but more importantly, I know staff would get calls. And so as long as we can work through that, but I'm told by staff and by Ms. Wayman that ATS, they seem to feel like they could come up with a process that wouldn't cause undue delay. And if that's the case, then great. So
Well, this survey is not nearly as extensive as the initial topographic survey.
Right. It's a
I mean,
pretty
'cause
straightforward.
It's kind of a
Right.
1 point.
it involves
and
math.
It's a matter of how many monuments we have and how accessible they are, and
Right. Which I think probably gets back to CRC.
And I think ultimate wish list, and we've been talking about this throughout this project, and I think it's something that would really help is if we establish monuments throughout the community. We don't know what that's going to cost yet, or how many we would need.
I mean, I don't understand how we've been able to do stuff for 50 years without having monuments.
Well, that's a
in the first
great
place.
question.
They use they're per property, so each
Our
property
surveyor wondered about that.
Yes,
Yeah.
he did.
Exactly.
Well, it shouldn't be per property. We should have
We should see little
some
medallions
standard,
around. Yeah.
some standard ones, around on our
Right.
manhole covers, or on something like that. We
Well,
should
they're-
have them.
they're
Okay, all
doing,
you walkers out there, be on the lookout
Find us some good
doing-
spots
for
that
some
will-
medallion that you don't know what it is or why you've walked by it 1,000 times.
We're in the middle of a $150,000 worth of surveying for the streets water project right now, and they're shooting all the grades of all the streets. I don't know why they couldn't set monuments at every intersection while they do that.
I agree with that.
I like it.
Okay, I didn't want to cut you off. I think you were about to make some sort of motion for future.
Yes, what I would move is that we ask staff, move to ask staff to bring this back onto our agenda next month, and that, in that interval, confer with our city engineers to get appropriate language so that we would establish survey requirements as needed for demolition prior to passing the framing inspection, and as-built, if that is their recommendation. The as-built piece, let's talk about that just a minute more. I guess I'm not ready for my motion.
Okay, we're gonna
Let's-
pull off the motion for a minute. Okay.
I would like to ask Councilmember Hudson, between the framing and the completion, if it's appropriate in your professional opinion to also require a final survey that would ensure that the as-built, finally constructed building is within tolerances.
I think my only concern with that is that if it's not, what are you gonna do at that point?
So,
I mean, once
are
the
you the way I would ask the question then is, are you comfortable with a survey done at the completion of framing? Is that such a known time period that we would know the height of the finished building at that point?
I think based on where we are measuring the height of the building, right? So that matters, I mean, because it says like at such a point, if it's a flat roof, it's to here, and if it's a gable roof, it's to, you don't measure to the top of the solar panel.
Well, it
You
would
don't
be,
measure to the,
So let me ask this question of any or all or staff. As drafted in either version, would ATS do the initial survey at the beginning of the project?
Currently, they do not. Well, not necessarily, I suppose, unless they were the ones that the builder had chosen. Currently, those are provided.
I'm just spitballing, but you could require that to be done if you're going to make the one at Framing done by your own city designee. You could also make the one done at the first by your city designee.
yes,
And then, in my opinion, the as-built survey would be totally redundant because you would have had because I think what you're trying to guard against is any shenanigans going on between Framing and the end. But if your own city designee is the one that sets the baseline and then checks it in the middle at Framing, I think you would have protected yourself against anything happening unforeseen at the end that would put you in what I see as your dilemma if there were a problem.
right.
well, and we would know if there were what we don't know is if there's shenanigans after the framing. That's the
But
issue.
Well, I
But I think
that-
you would because
See it.
it's the same and it's ATS inspecting it every time. And so if they set your best baseline and then they came out after Framing and then they show up for I'm trying to think what it's,
Occupancy permit.
no, I'm trying to think of what's the inspection after rough in, or it'd be like a plumbing rough after Framing. So if they show up for the plumbing rough and there's a new story, they're going to say, hey guys, that wasn't there last week when I was here for the Framing inspection. So I think you would be protecting yourself, but those are just my two thoughts.
I think we just have to make sure that the point that we measure the allowable height is based on the deck of the roof at a maximum, right? So that if you have, if you're having a tile roof and you've got, bumps on top of that, then you're not worried about, how thick are the tiles, or if you put solar panels on, you're not worried about if the solar panels are higher than the roof. Then, I think that's just what we have to do, because that would be established at the point that the framing is complete.
I have a question for staff. So, my understanding is that we do get pre-construction surveys. Are those required with a building permit application? And is there any standard for what kind of topography we're requesting in those surveys? There's not. So we could define that a little bit better. And I know you're talking about going back to ATS for the pre-construction survey too, which might be a good idea. Might not. I think we should talk about that. But in any case, there's not a standard on that survey, so it should have 5-foot topo lines at least on that, I would think.
And we can get Nikki up too. And I guess I'll be honest with you, I've never been wild about us being in charge of this.
Not either.
But that said, I am less wild about having a different surveyor do the first one,
Yeah.
and then our survey coming out and doing the one in the middle, which would be, or the one at Framing.
I don't think the middle one should even be called a survey. I'd call it a height measurement.
Or a height measurement. My point being, because I foresee if there's a hiccup at that Framing height inspection survey, a height inspection, then they're going to say, well, here's how we measured it.
You have to have the same basis.
You have to have the
for
same
both.
basis, and
Yes.
and then they're going to say, well, and then we're going to go, or the builder or the owner is going to go back to their first, whoever did their first topo or their first setting their baseline, and say, well, how did you guys and then we're going to get into this back, and that in and of itself, because we're owning that framing inspection or that framing height component, that in and of itself is going to delay the project while they figure out if they're speaking the same language or if they're comparing apples to oranges. And so I almost feel like, though I'm not wild about us owning this component, it's probably better for everybody if we own both of those first ones.
That's why it's consistent across the
That way it's
board.
consistent. Your datum is consistent.
Yes,
Right.
and we're not, as I understand it, what our representative would do would be to take whatever their survey is, and we verify it according to the standards that were established at the time the building permits originally approved. The height.
The way it is now.
The datum and the height, yes.
And what I'm suggesting is that would automatically be done if you own both of them.
I'm sorry?
In my opinion, yes.
We're not.
But that would be, we're not doing that currently, but
We're
in
not.
my opinion, that would take care of itself if our designated inspector / surveyor is the one doing both.
Yes, goes on site, says, yes, that's the datum reference, yes, that's the height, and we come back and check it.
And potentially, to make it easier also, sort of like we do our approved tree trimmers, right? I wouldn't be opposed to saying, hey, we've got 2 or 3 of these people who are certified by, or not certified, but that we've sort of vetted.
How about if we just have our ATS approve the survey? Because what's going to happen is, like, I'm working on some plans right now. My architect wants me to get a survey done. I'm going to do it. We draw plans, we come into the building, get a building permit, and then the city tells us, oh, you have to have another survey done by ATS. And it's like, I already paid for a survey 6 months or a year ago. Why are you making me do another one? But if ATS looks at it and says it's okay, it's approved, seems like that would be okay, since they're gonna be making the measuring on it. If they don't like it, they could say, no, we don't accept this survey.
And it seems to me, you know, the surveyors in town are gonna know what ATS
Yeah.
does after dealing with it 1 or 2 times. It's
Sure.
gonna become a known thing.
We'll have to have some standards on what they expect in that survey. I said 5-foot lines, but really it's probably 1-foot topo lines that you need.
Maybe 2.
It depends on what the slope is of the property.
Okay, so ATS could tell us the standards for surveys they would accept.
I mean, other language you could put in there, it's the city approved, it is either the city, what would you call it? Height inspector, city height inspector, and or that or an approved,
Yeah.
The designated,
what's that?
designated surveyor.
Or designated surveyor of that, something like that.
I think as
Yeah,
long
I
as
think-
it meets ATS's standards, that any licensed surveyor could do it, and we could have standards that they promulgate and we publish with our survey, you know,
It
requirements
just needs to
as
be
part of the building.
super clear
Yeah.
and,
It does.
yes, ma'am.
And I would say we want ATS to stay on our side of the fence on this. It's not that they can be hired by someone who's gonna build
Right.
and be on both sides of the fence.
So under that scenario, then it could be, you could tell someone, you can use ours.
No,
No,
no.
never, you do not tell them that.
That's the point. We want the survey to be a survey done for us at the builder's expense so that we can ensure that our standards are being met. And the surveyor's not compromised by who's paying them.
Let me rephrase in a different way that I wasn't going to say it, but I'm going to say it now.
Okay.
Would it be acceptable for us to say to an owner, you can pay us and we'll have ATS do it for you? Or, no. Or,
Because the reason I say that, there's more that surveyor's doing when they're doing it for the builder. You know,
I meant just on the height piece. I just meant on the height.
we are verifying one part of that survey. We are looking at it on the ground and saying, yes, you can go forward. Just like we do with wiring, just like we do with plumbing, just like we do with concrete, just like we do with other structural safety requirements.
So are you okay, just so the staff knows, and what I assume will be your motion in a minute, are you okay with a desk review of ATS? So you
No,
okay.
that's what we do today.
Well, hang on, because we're
'Cause
not
I think
even
that's what
getting
Kevin said.
complete sentences before we're getting answers, and I'm not really sure we're communicating here with the interruptions. But I think that what I'm suggesting is that ATS define what is required in a pre-construction or pre-permit survey, and that we publish those requirements along with our building code requirements or building permit requirements, and that anybody can use any survey that they have, but they have to submit it to ATS, and ATS has to approve it as part of the building permit application to make sure that that survey is legitimate, that it has the topo data we want, shows the elevations we want. And if they approve it and accept it, that's fine. If it doesn't meet their standards, it gets rejected, and then people have to go back and try again and get another survey. But they get to manage their own survey, hire who they want, do it when they want, as long as ATS approves that survey as part of the building permit application process.
And that's why I'm asking these questions, because I'm hearing Mr. Glasheen and I'm hearing Ms. Brown. And in my mind, I'm hearing two different things, and I just need to know. And if you want us to bring both versions back for your consideration next month, happy to do that. If you want us to bring just one, happy to do whatever you want. But just I want to make sure that we're
Yeah.
clear on how to draft it. So yes, ma'am.
And it's my understanding that ATS looks at the builder surveys that are, and so does K-Freeze, I believe, today. But they don't go out to the property and verify the datum reference and the height on the property. And what we want to have done, or at least what I hope, will move that we have done, is that we have that second step done by someone on our side of the fence. It won't take them more than, 30 minutes, perhaps, to do it. And that we have it done at before the building permit's issued and at framing, if that's the appropriate.
Got it. I
As
got it.
built
But
Okay.
it's,
standard.
But
But
so
that is what I am suggesting, not
Okay.
just an office visit,
I
not
got it.
just an office
So-
desktop review, but an actual site visit.
I'm clear. So just so everybody's, so I'm going to call that the kicking the tires option. So you want to kick the tires, you want to go out, put eyes on it, have our people do it. Got it.
Yes.
You want to clean up the process that we have currently and make it clearer and delineated more clearly, so that we have a true review by ATS to sign off on.
Right, because
I'm
right-
not advocating either one.
Sure,
I just
no.
want to make sure
And-
that we have what we need.
and if I can make a point on that, I think the real question is, what problem are we trying to solve? And the problem we're trying to solve, in my view, is that we don't have good elevation data pre-construction. And that if some of these surveys we get from builders don't even show elevations, I think, or don't show topo grids. Is that right? Or it varies dramatically from survey to survey. But if we're trying to solve a problem of fraudulent surveys, okay, then we can hire our ATS to go out and verify the elevations. But that's my question. Are we having a problem with fraudulent surveys that we need to correct with ATS going out and verifying these lying surveyors? Or is it a matter of the original survey the builders are getting done don't have sufficient data on them, or are they fine? I mean, what problem are we trying to solve is what I'm trying to understand.
Well, one problem, and you can jump in anytime, Nikki. I'm trying to help you where I can. I
can
think
respond.
one of the concerns is that currently, unless there's some sort of red flag, or there's some sort of concern, or there's something like that framing piece that we're talking about doing now isn't happening for whatever reason.
That's new. That has never been
Right,
required.
and so
It
I
has
think
been.
it's to try
It
to,
has? The framing and
but it's not necessarily, it hasn't necessarily been in required, I think is the issue. It hasn't been standardized.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you correctly. I thought you said it hadn't been a problem. It has
Oh,
been.
yeah, no, it's
No,
a
I said
problem.
it hasn't, sometimes it happened. I did it on my home, others have done it, but it's sort of been hit, there hasn't been a standardized,
Requirement.
here is when you have to do this.
Right.
And I think that's
And-
one problem that is trying to be addressed.
And that's fine, I understand that one. My question, it has to do with the survey pre-construction as part of the building permit application process. Why do we need our contract inspectors to go out and verify a survey if it's done by a licensed surveyor? Are we getting fraudulent surveys? And-
No, I think what it is if we go back to when we originally were doing those surveys on the 2 homes that we had originally brought up for kind of our review and kind of setting why we wanted these height surveys. When the surveyors went out and did the original surveys for the builder and then they built their plans based on that, that was one elevation. And it was set on a certain benchmark and it was done those. However, when our surveyor went out there, since we don't have any benchmarks around the city or monuments, they were having to find that area and calibrate it based on what that survey said. So in order for them to do that, they had to find another benchmark so they could set their standard to find that benchmark. So there's no standard for anybody to find a certain elevation. I think that's a big problem.
So
And then
I don't understand. I'm
I
sorry.
have one other clarification on that.
Can I finish letting her explain this?
All
'Cause
right.
Sure.
I'm
And then I'll
sorry.
come to you. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Or maybe the mayor, get the mayor's attention.
I will.
Yes.
Sorry, but I guess,
I want to follow up on what she just said, though, when the time
well,
comes.
go ahead,
We'll do.
that's
We'll do.
fine.
What time?
I will answer
Finish
your
your line of
question.
questioning, and then I'll
Okay.
go to Ms. Brown.
What, the only thing I wanted to say.
Yes, ma'am.
Was also, and tell me if I'm right, Nikki,
Yes, ma'am.
sometimes the point where the datum reference is established is covered up during the construction process. There can be a terrace, there can be a patio, there can be a swimming pool put on that spot, so you can't find it later. So that's why you want to go out at the time the original building permit is issued, so that you know where it's going to be and you verified it at that time. Because it may be covered up.
I'd like to hear from the engineering firm about that directly, because I'd like to hear them define the problem and what the solution is, short of requiring a second survey for homeowners who might have already just had a survey, that is perfectly adequate. I mean,
So when you say a second, sir, do you mean the one at the beginning, or do you mean the one at framing?
I'm talking about at the beginning. I'm assuming that homeowners are
That's-
going to get a survey 6 months before they
Understood. Just making
even
sure I
apply,
understood.
because the architects make you get it when you start trying to design. And then you come in to get a building permit and they say, oh, you have to get another survey now from KTS before I just don't want to require that until KTS tells us we need to do that to solve that, whatever problem it is. I understand there's a problem and I respect the description that you're giving of a problem, but I think if we hear that directly from the surveyors, we'll be able to
I have.
plan. Well, I'm glad you have, but we haven't. And I'd like to hear from them on what the solutions are, if there's anything short of requiring homeowners to pay them to go out and do another survey.
Yes, ma'am.
Mayor.
Ms. Brown.
Mr. Glassline, last year, starting in 2022, we started looking at some of these homes and these issues. And we did find this very problem. And then we had, because of concerns raised by a number of residents, we had our surveyors at the city's expense go out and say, are these homes built according to the datum reference established in the building permit? That's what controls the height. And that's when we learned that because we weren't having someone go to the site, then at the time the building permit's issued and verifying that starting point, the slope issue and the height issue at the time the building permit is issued, then our engineer had a very hard time and had